it's a great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Géraldine Borio, who I first met, I think, about 20 years ago when she was visiting Japan. More recently, we were colleagues at the University of Hong Kong. We were both guest professors there. And I think I previously invited her to give a lecture in Macau while I was based there. So Géraldine has worked for architecture firms in Tokyo and Beijing and Hong Kong. She's currently an assistant professor in the Department of Architecture at the University of Hong Kong. And she's the founder of Borio Lab, which is an independent research laboratory in architecture-based practice. She's a registered architect in Switzerland, where she's from. She holds a master's degree in architecture from EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, as well as a PhD in architecture from RMIT in Melbourne, Australia. She is the co-author of Hong Kong in Between, published in 2015, and The People of Duckling Hill, published in 2016. Now, her research and her architecture work have been exhibited at venues such as the Vitra Design Museum, the International Architecture Biennale in Rotterdam, the M+ Museum in Hong Kong, the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism, the Zurich University of the Arts, Beijing Design Week, and the ICI Curatorial Hub in New York. Now, I personally have long been fascinated by her research into the everyday, seemingly disorderly spaces of Asian cities, and hugely impressed by the graphic techniques she employs to present that research, the results of which you will find in the book she introduces today, which is called Looking for the Voids, which I highly recommend, although full disclosure, I wrote the introduction to the book. There is, of course, no Asian city as such. There are only cities in Asia, each with their own inflections of color and texture and culture and climate and topography and flora and noise and odor. And she responds to each city on its own terms, identifying its particularities, but nonetheless finding common principles and prototypes from which she develops diagrams that might survive relocation to be usefully applied elsewhere. Her taxonomy of urban elements that I think she will present tonight, including voids, gaps, boundaries, and so on, provide general categories for observation that inspire her specific attempts at implementation. So I think for her work to recognize the manifest intelligence of apparently dysfunctional urban conditions is already to confer a degree of dignity on the places and people she's looking at. And then she shares these insights through the words and drawings and built projects contained in the book. I think is an act of generosity to the citizens of those cities, but also to those of us living elsewhere. She embraces the colorful ambiguity of the world around her, distilling its essences, but never reducing anything to black and white. So over to you, Géraldine.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And hi, everyone. This is the book that will be that is published by Park Book, and that will be officially out. It's printed and it will be officially out in a few days from now. So this is how it will look like. Let me back to the first page here. Okay. So sorry, full screen. To make it full screen. Yeah. This one doesn't need Oh, thank you very much. Okay, we're all good. All right, so, but today, so I'm going to talk about the content of the book, and in particular, really focusing on the importance for me of drawings in the book. So let's start. So for the past 15, 16 years now, I've been looking at Asian cities from a very specific point of view. That is the point of view of what I call in-between spaces. So in-between spaces are places that are urban space. They are not planned as public space or designed as public space, but nevertheless, they are used by the inhabitants of the cities. I've been looking at sites in Bangkok, in Hong Kong, and also in Seoul, and all of them, 5 sites are included in the book. So I made some kind of observations about those spaces, trying to really understand them, trying to find ways to make sense or analyze them. Just to mention that these spaces, they are important for the inhabitants of the cities because they really allow them to breathe within the cities. But they also, I believe, very important for architects because they contain a set of design strategies that could be very inspiring for the making of architecture. So the talk is organized in two parts. So first part, I'm going to talk about a way of reading the city. And second part is about the way of writing back to the city. So in other words, intervening directly within the city, but also perhaps through the production of drawings, providing another narrative of what the city is. The first part, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my practice and methodology and take you through 3 case studies. And the second part, we're going to see how potentially those learnings, they could be applied to the design of projects. So this is how it looks. The practice I've been running for more than 16 years. It's kind of a diagram showing in black, you will see the observation, the case study of different sites. As you will see here, they are usually taking several years. I'm usually living in the place that I'm studying and deeply diving within this, the case studies. But in parallel, I'm also producing some kind of design where we interpret somehow the learning that I've observed. So it's important for me to work within those two kind of parallel, a way of reading and a sort of way of writing. Just to mention what you see also, I don't know if it shows, yeah, on Zoom it shows. The lines here, they are the time where I produce the drawings. And as you will see, they are not necessarily happening in the beginning, but more after a certain while where I really immerse within the sites. Somehow the drawings are maybe the first tool to kind of present the findings. So today I'm going to talk about the very first project in Bangkok and then 2 of the longest project here in Hong Kong. The content of the book really is a kind of a revisiting of this different project. And for that, my methodology of rereading the observations was to look back at them according to 5 different layers. So I've looked at voids, trying to really understand these empty spaces. I've looked at the installations within the sites that are usually built by non-professionals. I've looked at boundaries and really understanding this kind of relationship between inside and outside. Look at functions and really recording the kind of activities happening within the case study sites. And finally, I've looked at structure and material. So it's important you keep in mind the 5 colors because somehow they will guide through the analysis. So first case study in Bangkok, there was a project started really long time ago, and there I investigated the residual space under the elevated expressways. So this is how it looked in 2007. You will find in the middle of the city a series of empty sites that are clearly not planned as a public space. They are really resultant of other larger scale agendas, but still I find them really interesting because they are located within the city centers and not as you would expect them to be at the periphery of the city. So going back to old maps, I realized that in fact in Bangkok, the city was built on a floated plain. And in a way, before the mode of transportations was through canal, irrigation canal. So basically, you use the boat to travel within the city. And as the city developed itself, and also the need of car transportation systems, so it was in a way easier for to fill up the existing canals, but also as these canals, they are really usually dead ends perpendicular to the main river. So this is definitely a irrigation water channel irrigation logic. But it was much easier also to simply overlap a system of expressways. And therefore, you see those resultant sites here that are really left over underneath the expressways. But those empty sites, they are usually occupied by smaller installations. So when walking through those sites, I identify a series of very small scale type of installations that are usually made by the people living next to them. Just also to mention that those sites then also they are clearly disconnected from one side to the other. And in a way, it was interesting to record all these kind of smaller sets of installations that are somehow creating some anchor points within the voids here. When we look closely also at the items that are collected within these sites, there is a strong connections between the close neighborhoods. The people are really bringing their own old use furniture to the sites. So there is, in a way, this kind of reconnection between the two sides of the neighborhoods. But again, when we really understand the kind of structural and material kind of use of these installations, it's very, very minimal. They're really making the most of these existing sites, since there is the expressway bridge as a kind of a covering. They really, furnitures are clearly enough, in fact, to create space. After that, so moving to Hong Kong, so I've been looking at a network of interstitial space that are called backlanes at the feet of skyscrapers. So for those who know Hong Kong, this is kind of an amazing city in the way that it's really built in a tiny portion of land. And really you will find some very kind of tall towers. And I was really interested in looking at what is in between those tall towers. So this little space here that you will find in most of the area of the cities. I was interested by the fact that there are not major landmarks, such as the most famous Hong Kong towers, but because of their presence everywhere in the city, they're really impacting the way we perceive the city. So this research was really about trying to really record the life within those lanes, and really trying to kind of also ask ourselves really the impact they had on the daily life in the city. So looking at those, we're looking at this project from the point of view of voids. What you see here is actually, so this is Hong Kong Island here. This is Kowloon. So in a way, these are the main densest part of the cities. And what you see here in yellow, they are not buildings, but they are voids. So you see the accumulation of backlanes here. And somehow I find it interesting to realize that in fact, those voids or those in-betweens, they are really impactful in the reading of the city. Bad quality, maybe will improve. But again, looking at all maps, this is a map from 1922 and 2012, you will see that in fact these voids here that were originally service lanes at the back of the buildings, they really change morphologies as the city and the skyscraper built around them. So this is how it looks, a typical backlane, this kind of voids. But in reality, it's occupied by a series of installations. And these installations are interesting, I think, because they're really at the articulating the inside and the outside and somehow expanding to the lane. So we stayed there around 12 hours in this one of these lanes, observing the life that happened there. And somehow there I started to really understand that these small installations, they are all of them connected. Because for example, here, this is a very tiny hot pot restaurant that you have in one of those lanes, but that is too tiny to accommodate the tables inside. So of course, like the tables, they go to the lane. But then after a while, also, it was interesting to start to understand that in fact, the meat that is served here in the restaurants is actually stored in this back shop at the back of the butcher shop here. And the meat itself is defrosted during the afternoon here in another part of the lane. And finally, also to realize that the guy living here in this tiny, tiny space was also providing somehow the pancakes to be served in the restaurants. So looking at the kind of relationship and programmatical relationship of those spaces, it was interesting to really understand the kind of the network connection. Looking at a little bit more in detail of one of these installations that takes place in the lane, and really looking at the question of voids. Within the voids, there is actually a smaller voids here that is provided or that is kept for the inhabitant or the neighbors to be able to cross here. So there is a kind of an awareness of the space within this void. Well, I was always in most of the installations that I've recorded, I was always impressed by the level of articulation of the space. It's very tiny footprint, but then it really opens to or make the most of the available space and somehow expand itself to the four directions. I was really interested also to really, by this question of boundaries, what is inside and outside. This is actually an outdoor space, but definitely looking like an inside space, interior space. And you will see in this case study, for instance, really how it expands to or how it kind of reclaim the neighboring facade really to be part of the project. Finally, looking at the structure and material, when we remove everything, we realize that it's actually very frugal and very minimal type of intervention. So the next project, Ducking Hill. So going away a little bit from the city, I got to know about this site, which is located in the hill at the periphery, or really it's kind of a buffer zone between the dense city, the new town of Tseungkwan-ho, and then the country park. So in Hong Kong, in Hong Kong, the city is really concentrated on the black areas that you have here. It will get clear, yeah. And 70% of the territory is kept unbuilt because there is the regulation on country parks. But what is interesting is that there is still this kind of yellow buffer zones here between really the density and the country park. And this is exactly where this hill is located, the hill called Ducking Hill. Before the hill was next to the sea, so the shore used to be here, but then it went through a succession of reclamation here. So the sea was sent very far away. The goal of doing that was to build a new town. So this is how it looks like, very standardized type of buildings. And with the influx of new inhabitants within the new towns, somehow the hill started to be occupied. So this is how it looks. So we'll see standardized new towns that most of them are also most of them are living space. But you will see that people going to the hill every day, they started really to appropriate the hill for themselves and really creating these small installations on the hill. what is interesting again is that it's a kind of a reaction from the very standardized type of living and also very, very small space to really bring their personal goods to the hill. And in a way, it's interesting because it really shows the expansion of the personal and private territories over these hills. But of course, these installations, they are illegal. So there is a constant fight between the inhabitants and the government because the government is regularly trying to clear up the space. But looking at the structure, we will see several sets of strategies developed by the inhabitant to potentially try to hide the shelters. So for example, in this one, they really focus on the minimal. So they provide a ground and sitting occasions and a little bit of a structure, but also invite the nature to grow and provide the roof. And it's really a kind of a hide and seek play with the government. So trying to really hide those installations so that the government doesn't really notice them. So in this kind of strategy, I find some kind of useful techniques. So this is 3 examples of this development of a way of reading, and somehow I realized it was really useful to combine them together and really to start to understand that behind this kind of so-called informality, there are actually a kind of sets of principles or rules that are applied to the making of the space. So by defining voids, for instance, or interlocking the gaps, overlapping functions or expanding boundaries, and as usual, frugal use of structure and material. So this is valid, of course, for the small installations, but also for the case of the site itself. So I really read those space not as an accumulation of installations, but as a kind of a space that it's itself subdivided and articulated as a whole piece. So I think it was useful to do that, to really understand a little bit better the kind of making of the space. But then I also wanted to really test how much of these observation was inspiring for the making of projects, spatial project. So I reread my own project with the same technique and to really try to see if there were some clues. So this is a project I've built with my first office in Hong Kong. This is it's called Connecting Space, and it's the location of an art school from Switzerland that wanted to have a little anchor point in Hong Kong. So the space is located here, and again here you see in yellow that is really, so these are the backlands, these are the voids. So it's really in an area full of those in-between spaces. So the idea was, this is how it looks in the plan. So the idea was really also to kind of integrate this space within this network of void space. So first intention was maybe intuitively to really keep as maximum void as possible. So really not filling up the gaps. So the main idea was really to keep it open and to focus on this area at the entrance part, that is the facade subdivided in two layers. So in a way, this facade, because it can be lifted up and down, it also rearticulates somehow the space inside. Question of boundary, really enclosing by not only one layer but 2 layers, is also providing somehow a pocket space at the entrance of the building, but then also expand or give the possibility to expand. But of course, when both layers are open, the full space is completely public, and it's an invitation also for the neighborhood to occupy the space. Because it's empty, it allows really the overlapping of different activities. And here, all the furniture, they were designed to be mounted on wheels, so then they can also be stored in this area here. So I think really defining these voids really allows also this kind of multiple type of activities to happen. But again, what I've learned from the lanes or from the hills was really this minimal use. So it's really the idea, what is the minimum amount of interventions that could still enable the place to be lived. So the final one, this is a small project built in Pengcha, a small island in Hong Kong. And this is a 3-story house, 1 flat per floor. It's also somehow connected to the void space of the island here, and so this is the side. The side has also the proportion somehow of a back lane, but also there is an area here, a mini lane that also cannot be included within the project. So this was, of course, the occasion also to question this, how to intervene within the sites. So the idea of the project, what you see here, typical, this is, the island is a kind of a version of all Hong Kong before the towers. And you will see that typically the facade is oriented towards the streets and everything is happening behind the main facade. But the main idea was really to kind of shift the orientation of the project and to provide the staircase really in the front facade. So in a way to create a buffer zone or climatic layer on the 3 sides of the project. So in a way, the center part is the climatically controlled area, but the surrounding somehow voids is the climatic buffer. So as the project is oriented towards the south, so here it really prevents the sunshine to enter the space, but then the facade is completely translucent on the periphery, so it still allows the light to penetrate. So defining the voids, also by making sure there is no structure within the center part of the project, then also allows later, you will see kind of a different configuration of layout. Interlocking the space, so by smaller components, and in particular by placing the kind of facility, the bathrooms on the periphery, also allows a different kind of connections to the context. Expanding boundaries, so how to make use of these neighboring walls and how to kind of include them within the project. So yeah, you will see that because there is no structure blocking, so everything could be also like the configurations can be reinvented. But all of that with a very kind of minimal use of materials. So the structure is really only on the 2 sides here, very small columns going to the ground, but everything is otherwise very kind of flexible. So by reflecting on this way of reading and way of writing, somehow I kind of came up with more precise sets of principles. So refining them a little bit. So defining the voids, resisting the urge of filling up the gaps. So this is somehow what came to mind before starting a project, maybe deciding where not to build or where even perhaps removing material or removing parts. This could be perhaps the first action. Interlocking gaps, so really trying to, after a careful reading of the existing, trying to really understand how we could articulate the space with a minimal footprint, such as kind of the mini installations. Expanding boundaries, so this principle really advocates for trying to bring within the perimeter of the project things that we don't necessarily own. So it's really questioning this notion of, yeah, what do you own, what can you grab from the surroundings, overlapping functions, so how to alternate different activities during different time. This is sounds to be quite obvious, but when we keep that maybe at the beginning of the project, it's a kind of a reminder that, yeah, living the flexibilities will be maybe more productive. And being frugal, so trying to really reduce the excess of material, but nevertheless trying to maximize the experience of the space. So yeah, this is a kind of a summary of somehow the different reading of the sites. And maybe to conclude, I was just maybe going to share that idea with you that when we start to read the city as a system of threshold, maybe the act of architecture or writing back to the city can be seen as the act of articulating the voids. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take some questions.
Yes, please.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
How should I do that?
Question from Nicolas.
I don't hear anything.
I made the chat.
Ah, okay.
So you want to read out his question?
Is there any previous research to decide what kind of representation is used to show your research? Yes. Maybe I can, how should I answer that? The first book I wrote on Hong Kong in between, the representation was really black and white. So it was, and also it was really about looking at section and plan. And in a way, I felt that this was really interesting, but then somehow it misses the kind of nuances. And then I really tried to develop things more kind of in 3D, and also introducing the different colors to kind of somehow illustrate what I was, I don't know, feeling when observing the space. And maybe the change from the 2D to the 3D is sounds perhaps very obvious, but for me it was a whole loop. But I don't know if this is what you were asking. So all of those projects, they are previous way of being represented, but then I redrew all of them for the making of the book. Thank you. Hey, hi. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for the fantastic talk. As you know, very big fan of your work. I'm just curious, for the context of this talk, I'm very curious if you could expand a little bit on your experience of developing a form of sixth sense for these spaces. You know, Thomas started actually by explaining that, you know, the way you observe and document the city is a form of generosity, which I quite enjoy. You spend attention and time to a certain part of the city. But I'm just wondering if, for example, if you go home to Switzerland, do you see the city differently now that you experienced, you know, so many unique moments in Bangkok, Hong Kong, and Seoul? Is there something that you can take away from this sensitivity, from this way of looking at a city in a unique way that maybe in Europe would help you to see it differently? I don't know.
Thank you very much, yeah, for the question. And I really like when you talk about the sixth sense. I think it's very true that it's the sixth sense that I activate when I'm immersing within the space. So I spend really a long time walking through the space and somehow kind of emptying the brain and really like turning on the sixth sense. And trying also not to think too much and trying to to absorb the context. And I have to say that it's very difficult for me to do that in Europe. It's very difficult. I try to get the same kind of enjoyment, but somehow things are not clicking, you know. So maybe also perhaps because in Europe I can make sense of things much more easily, you know. I can somehow, I have the plan in my mind and I know, you know, I'm in the plaza and then I'm, you know, like things are more, I can make sense of things. And what was interesting for me coming to Asia was that I could not make sense, but also always resisted to this idea that it's just chaotic and that's it. You know, like going to Bangkok, for instance, and there is this overlapping of several layers. And yes, it looks chaotic, but there might be some rules behind that. And this is what I was always interested to look for. And therefore, I looked back at the 2D also and to the maps. And there are great indications. So perhaps not the same way we will, actually the same way we will read the European city, could in a way be applied to these places. But to go back to your questions, like the sixth sense, yes, unfortunately, I don't have the same, you know, trigger.
Brilliant, thanks.
Thank you very much.
In this summer, I went to the Porto in Portugal, and that's the city also had the main barriers using of the void of the urban space. And it's so interesting. And Hong Kong is also interesting, but I'm so sad that the Japanese city is so poor using of the voice of the urban space.
No, seriously?
How do you think of it?
No, I was thinking for me, like today when coming to here, I was thinking it's very awkward because coming to Japan, I see that this use of the voice, there is such an awareness of that, right? And I deeply appreciate that. So I was thinking maybe you will find it very bland.
Okay.
Because but in Hong Kong there is not an awareness, so that's also the reason for the book, is that things are very clearly divided. I'm talking also more about practitioners. I don't see this use of the porosity, which in a way in Japan, I think even the practitioner, I can find that, yeah. So no, there is really not. It's very rich here.
Okay. I will search more.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. The installation and the project you showed us in the void was on the human scale, it's until the first floor, or at least it can be the second floor or something. But on your yellow graphic, the representation of the void was extruded to the top of the building, which means like a 60 meters or something.
It's like 25 stories, so that makes 75 meters.
And my question is, do you think like for example, in the Kyoto, because of the maximum regulation of the building, the height of the void is gonna be maybe 10 meters or something. But in the Hong Kong, it can be higher.
Right.
But if we human beings want to use the void from the street, it can only be from the ground, so it can be the only one floor or something. So do you think is there any difference between the voids? Like the installation or something gonna be changed between the height of the void, or
I think you're right. Like it really happens within this kind of 2 meters on the ground. but even though you cannot access it, but the proportion it's really impactful on the way you perceive the space, right? So for example, the project in Bangkok, we also did another project that was doing some kind of happenings within the backlinks, and we chose very different type of voice, so like the 3-story type of voice, and also like the 75-story type of voice. And you will see that, yeah, the way also how people are using those voices are different for sure, right? So yeah, I would say that, yeah, it really impacts what happened on the street level for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
My research is about pet architecture.
Pet architecture?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so I'm also doing like the same methodology, observing the city, collecting samples, and see how those buildings came up on a very small piece of land. And I see a lot of interesting stuff in your presentation. The last 2 samples that you presented, this was the design. You're really correct. I want to know about the maybe the restrictions you faced during the design process, if possible.
Yes.
And I have another question regarding the voids that you targeted in the city. Did they make any, or did they present any kind of indicator about the socioeconomic life of the city?
Sorry, can you repeat this?
The voids.
Yeah.
That you targeted in the city, and specifically the back lanes.
Yeah.
We were able to see small restaurants and like a small living area for one person. So did they tell anything about the level of the socioeconomic condition of the city? Or maybe people have like a gap in their economy, maybe there's no middle class, so that's why we see like high-rise buildings and poor people like living in those small areas. Like those voices, do they give us an indicator about like this kind of gap in the economy?
Yeah, okay. So there are 2 very kind of deep questions. So maybe I'll start with the first one. Yeah, that's super interesting. And of course, like pet architecture, I'm very much aware, as Thomas mentioned, I also work with Atelier Bauer earlier, and probably there is a very strong influence in the way of looking at the city for sure. So for the project themselves, yes, the first one, I will say, so what was interesting in the site is the fact that they are not legal. Like there is not a legal thing that tells you have the right to build there, or you don't have, right? So therefore it produces a kind of instability in the city and a kind of an ambiguity. So it's really, of course there are rules, but this is really a negotiation amongst the neighbors, right? Because if you would ask the police, they will say it's illegal, right? But because it's kind of accepted by the neighbors, they are allowed to exist. But in architectural projects, we have a proper site, right? It's like the client has the site. So for example, in the first project, this idea was to push the boundaries inside. So because this is something no one can tell you something, right? This is your plot of land, so you can decide where is the limit. So pushing boundaries outward or inward, maybe if you want to play with this question of ambiguous boundaries, of course, like we pushed it inside, and even to the back of the shop, because then you really open to the whole neighborhoods to happen. So it's kind of the reverse idea that usually you want to include everything inside, right? So by doing the opposite, by offering the ground to the neighborhoods, then maybe there is a way to kind of question this regulation. In the other project, so the limit was set also, it was also like a fixed plot. But what was really for sure is that we could not include the backlane, right? So there was this kind of invisible line, which was great because I think as a designer, you could propose that to a client, but the client will, at least in Hong Kong, will never accept to leave this gap, right? So I think in terms of the regulations, there was more a stronger negotiation with the client, how much he wanted really every square meter to be inside or not out or not inside. I have to say that I wish I had that would have been that the facade could be a little bit more porous and openable. But from the perspective of the client, it needed to be counted as indoor square meter. So therefore, the facade is kind of sealed, but it was supposed to be a little bit more porous. So perhaps the negotiation with the client in this case was the main regulation. From the government point of view, they were not, everything fits within. But I think this is something that I don't really question, and I'm really more trying to see what are the strategies to still expand boundaries. For instance, in this project, by providing the kind of the filter of the facade, it's kind of a spatial strategy to include the neighbor walls as the indoor facade somehow. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not going to go today, so it was hard to one interesting part of Hong Kong is it is a very highly developed city, and it's constantly changing. I've read some article about Hong Kong, for instance, like there was a law of regulation of smoking, so on the streets, they cannot smoke. So the people wants to smoke comes the void of the building to smoke. So I'm wondering, is there any transforming of use of the voids of your projects? Because you said that you have studied for some places for like a lot of years. So is there any transforming of space?
Along the years, but you're right. First of all, like this regulation is not super strict, right? Of not smoking in the streets, but still, yeah, I think it's forbidden. I'm not a smoker, but I think it's forbidden. But you're completely right. People gather in the backlinks to smoke. And to go back to your question, this is no matter which kind of social status, right? It's really a place where a lot of different people meet, right, from different social ranks. Also because those backlinks, they happens to be in the central district also, where also like the, like the white collars are there. So it's really a place where different kind of social status meet, yeah. But if I notice some changes, I think the main change I notice is that right now the government is much more open to the idea of occupying the lanes and to allowing business to happen in the lanes. Before, I could not really see, like fancy restaurants in the lanes, and now it becomes a kind of a trend. And I don't know if it's good or not. But it's, I think that now the government, because there were a lot of things, published, and I think the government now is using that. So they're changing their point of view. But it's also a kind of a gentrification phenomenon that is happening at the same time, which can be questioned.
I have a question. Thank you for your presentation. Through your observation, you see some like takeovers to like how to work with the climate, because like Bangkok or especially Hong Kong, they have a harsh climate, and there sometimes they have like sport, but they use this kind of like void outside space as a living. So did you see something?
Yes, definitely. And this is also one of the inspiration. Maybe I really didn't mention that clearly, but this awareness of the climate is also something that they really, because they go every day to the site, so they're so aware of this kind of climate specificity, and you will see the whole installations, they are really formed in a way to respond to this climate. And actually those links, they are climate-wise quite comfortable. because they are so narrow and tall. So during the summer, there is a lot of shadow, for instance. For the rain, they're really able to provide canopy, and since the links they are not very wide, so they really cover them and create some kind of tunnels. So there are lots of super interesting strategies. It's cooler than when you have like the typical street, for instance. And then, yes, same on the hill as well. They really know how to benefit from the breeze, from the wind. So it's interesting because in Hong Kong, in typical shopping malls, everything is climate, like full of air conditionings and climatically controlled. But those are almost the only places in the cities where you can be 365 days of the year outside, and it's comfortable. Yeah.
Okay, Géraldine, thank you for a really fantastic presentation. What I find most inspiring is the way you take a kind of research method of observation of the city as a kind of basis for developing your own architectural projects. Obviously, part of that would be influenced by your time spent with Atelier Bawa, but clearly you're also bringing your own language and your own interests into the work. It's evolved into something quite different and applying it to different contexts in other parts of the world. So I think as a model for research through design or design based on research, I think it has so many lessons to teach our students. And I'm really grateful that you came here today to show it to us.
Thank you.